Forget everything Hollywood taught you about the Wild West gunslinger. That iconic image of a cowboy with his revolver slung low on his thigh, hand hovering over the grip, waiting for high noon? Pure fiction. In the real Old West, how a man carried his gun wasn't about looking dangerous. It was about staying alive. Today, we're uncovering 13 actual ways frontiersmen carried their firearms. Methods born from necessity, not mythology. And stick around for number 1 because it's the carry system that truly earned the name gunslinger. Number 13, the waistband tuck, the no-holster gamble. Picture a working cowhand in 1873. He's making $30 a month, spending most of it on food, tobacco, and the occasional whiskey. A custom leather holster? That's a luxury he can't afford. So he does what thousands of frontier men did. He shoves his revolver straight into his waistband and hopes for the best. The waistband tuck was the most common carry method among working-class cowboys for one simple reason. It cost nothing. A man could slide a Colt Navy or a Remington pocket revolver behind his belt buckle, barrel pointed down, grip angled for a crossbody grab. No leather, no stitching, no fuss, just iron and faith. This method worked reasonably well for men who weren't expecting trouble. The gun stayed relatively secure during light work, and it kept the weapon concealed under a coat or vest when riding into towns with strict carry ordinances. Plenty of cowhands who couldn't afford a proper rig relied on the waistband tuck for years without incident. But the dangers were obvious. Without a holster to protect the trigger guard, an accidental discharge was always one wrong movement away. A stumble, a spooked horse, even bending over to pick up a dropped coin could shift the revolver's position and put pressure on the trigger. Contemporary newspaper accounts from cattle towns like Abilene and Wichita mentioned cowboys shooting themselves in the leg or groin with alarming regularity. The waistband tuck was cheap and convenient. It was also a gamble every single day. For men who could scrape together a few extra dollars, almost any holster was better than none. But on the frontier, sometimes none was all you had. Number 12, the coat pocket carry. The town gun solution. Walk into any frontier town in the 1870s, and you'd find signs posted at the edge of the main street. No firearms within city limits. Dodge City, Tombstone, Deadwood. They all had strict ordinances banning the open carry of weapons inside town boundaries. Visitors were expected to check their guns with the sheriff or leave them at the livery stable. But not everyone followed the rules. Gamblers, traveling salesmen, and men with enemies often carried small revolvers hidden in their coat pockets. A Colt 1849 pocket model or a Remington Derringer fit perfectly inside a suit jacket without creating a visible bulge. The gun stayed concealed, the law stayed satisfied, and the carrier kept his insurance policy within arm's reach. Coat pocket carry wasn't about fast draws or gunfighter bravado. It was about discretion. A man could sit at a poker table for hours with a pistol inches from his hand, and no one at the table would know unless he wanted them to. That element of surprise was worth more than any quick-draw holster in a room full of card sharps and sore losers. The drawbacks were significant. Drawing from a coat pocket was slow and clumsy compared to a belt holster. The fabric could snag on the hammer or front sight, costing precious seconds in a confrontation. And if the coat was buttoned, forget about getting to the weapon quickly at all. Still, for men navigating the legal gray areas of frontier towns, the coat pocket carry offered a practical solution. It kept them armed without getting them arrested. In places where wearing a visible gun made you a target for both lawmen and troublemakers, sometimes the smartest weapon was the one nobody knew you had. Number 11, the boot top holster, the hidden backup. Every experienced gunfighter knew a terrible truth. Revolvers jam, cylinders misfire, powder gets wet. When your primary weapon fails in the middle of a fight, you need a second option, and you need it fast. Enter the boot top holster. This small leather sheath strapped around the calf or tucked inside the boot shaft, holding a compact revolver or derringer as a last-ditch backup. Gamblers favored it for the same reason outlaws did. It was virtually invisible. A man could be searched, patted down, even have his belt gun confiscated, and still walk away with a hidden ace. The boot-top carry dates back to the 1850s, when percussion derringers became popular among riverboat gamblers along the Mississippi. These tiny pistols, barely 6 inches long, fit perfectly against the ankle without restricting movement. By the 1870s, metallic cartridge versions from Remington and Colt had made the setup even more practical. But accessing a boot-top weapon was never easy. A man had to bend down, lift his trouser leg, and yank the pistol free, all while someone might be shooting at him. It was slow, awkward, and left the shooter completely exposed during the draw. This wasn't a primary carry method. It was a desperation move. The boot-top holster survived because desperation moves sometimes save lives. When everything else failed, when the main gun was empty and the fight wasn't over, that little derringer against the ankle could buy a man one more chance. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fast, but in the moment it mattered, it was there. Surviving examples in private collections and the Autry Museum of the American West show the wear patterns of men who hoped they'd never need to reach for that backup, and understood they might. Number 10. The shoulder rig. The detective's concealed classic. Not every man who carried a gun on the frontier wanted the world to know about it. Pinkerton agents, Wells Fargo investigators, and undercover lawmen needed their weapons hidden but accessible. For these men, the shoulder rig became the carry system of choice. The shoulder holster emerged in the 1870s as an adaptation of cavalry pommel holsters. Instead of mounting on a saddle, the holster hung from a leather harness worn under a coat, positioning the revolver horizontally beneath the left arm for a right-hand cross draw. The weapon stayed completely concealed until the moment it was needed. Commercial versions appeared in catalogs from firms like Schuyler, Hartley, and Graham around 1875. They advertised these rigs as gentlemen's concealed holsters, targeting professionals who needed discretion. The most common pairings were compact revolvers, Colt 1849 pockets, Smith & Wesson Model 1s, and the ever-present Remington Derringer. The tactical advantages were significant. A shoulder rig kept the weapon accessible even while seated in a train car or stagecoach. It distributed the weight across both shoulders instead of dragging on one hip. And it allowed a man to reach his gun through an unbuttoned coat front in a smooth, natural motion. Period records from the Pinkerton National Detective Agency mention shoulder holsters issued to plainclothes operatives working undercover in Chicago, St. Louis, and Denver. These weren't gunfighters looking for showdowns. They were investigators who needed to blend in until the moment they didn't. The downside was comfort. Leather straps dug into shoulders during long days, and summer heat made the rigs miserable. But for men whose work demanded concealment, the trade-off was worth it. The shoulder rig was the sidearm of professionals who didn't announce their intentions. They simply acted when the time came. Number 9. The pommel holster, carrying on horseback. Long before belt holsters became standard, frontiersmen carried their revolvers the same place cavalry troopers did, on the saddle itself. The pommel holster was a leather sheath mounted to the front of the saddle horn, designed to hold the massive cap and ball revolvers of the 1840s and 50s. We're talking about Colt Walkers, Dragoons, and early Army models. Guns that weighed over 4 pounds loaded. No man was strapping that to his hip for a 12-hour ride across open country. The design made perfect sense for mounted men. The revolver hung balanced on the saddle, easily accessible to either hand, and the rider's weight never rested on the gun. A flap covered the hammer to keep out dust and rain. The whole system kept the weapon secure during hard riding while leaving it ready for a quick grab in an ambush. U.S. Dragoons carried paired pommel holsters during the Mexican-American War, and civilian riders copied what worked. Mail carriers, scouts, and early Texas Rangers all used saddle-mounted rigs when belt carry wasn't practical. Some setups held 2 revolvers, one on each side of the horn, giving the rider 12 shots without reloading. As lighter revolvers like the Colt Navy became popular in the 1850s, pommel holsters started to fade. Men wanted their guns on their bodies, not on their horses. But for decades before that, the pommel rig was the standard carry system for anyone who spent their life in the saddle. Original examples survive in the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame and the Cody Firearms Museum. Their leather is cracked and sun-faded, worn smooth by rains and weather. Proof that the Old West gunfighter's first holster wasn't on his hip. It was on his horse. Number 8. The sash carry. The vaquero influence. Before American cowboys developed their own leatherworking traditions, they learned from the men who came before them. Mexican vaqueros had been working cattle in the Southwest for generations, and they brought their own methods of carrying weapons. One of the most distinctive was the sash carry. A wide cloth sash wrapped around the waist served as belt, holster, and fashion statement all in one. A revolver simply tucked into the fabric folds, grip facing forward or backward depending on the wearer's preference. The sash held the weapon snug through friction alone. No leather loops or metal clips required. This carry method crossed the border, along with countless other vaquero traditions, from roping techniques to saddle designs. American frontiersmen adopted it both for practicality and for style. Wild Bill Hickok famously carried his matched pair of Colt Navy revolvers in a red sash during his early career in Kansas, a look that became part of his legend. The sash carry offered surprising security. The thick fabric gripped the revolver tightly, and the weapon sat at a comfortable angle against the body. For men who couldn't afford tooled leather, or who wanted something lighter in hot weather, a simple cloth sash did the job. But it had obvious limitations. Drawing from fabric was slower than drawing from a formed holster. The sash could loosen with sweat and movement, and there was nothing protecting the trigger guard from accidental contact. It worked best for men who wanted their guns accessible but weren't expecting a quick-draw showdown. The sash carry eventually faded as American leatherworkers refined their holster designs, but its influence never disappeared completely. It was a reminder that the Old West was shaped by many cultures, and sometimes the most practical solution came wrapped in a piece of colored cloth. Number 7. The belt slide. The working man's solution. Most frontier cowboys weren't professional gunfighters carrying custom rigs and matched revolvers with ivory grips. They were laborers earning $1 a day, spending most of it on food, tobacco, and the occasional night in town. Their gun carry reflected that hard reality. The belt slide was about as simple as a holster could possibly get. A flat piece of leather with a slot, cut through it, just wide enough to slide over a standard belt. The revolver's barrel poked through the slot, and the frame rested flat against the leather backing. That was the entire design. No formed pouch to cradle the cylinder, no retention strap to secure the hammer, no fancy tooling or decorative stamping, just barely enough leather to keep the gun from falling on the ground while a man worked. Cowboys could make a serviceable belt slide from saddle scraps in under an hour. Cut the leather to shape, soak it in water, form it around the revolver's frame, then let it dry, stiff in the sun. The whole process cost almost nothing beyond time. A ranch hand who couldn't spare a week's wages for a proper holster from a saddler could still carry his revolver securely enough for everyday work on the range. The belt slide rode high on the waist, positioning the weapon clear of saddle leather and swinging ropes. It worked particularly well for short-barreled Colts and compact Smith & Wesson pocket models, guns that didn't need substantial support to stay in place. Period photographs from cattle drives along the Chisholm Trail show plain, rough-edged slides on working cowboys who clearly cared more about function than appearance. The limitations were obvious to anyone who used one. A belt slide offered virtually no protection from weather, dust, or trail grit. The leather wore out quickly, stretching and softening with daily use until it barely gripped the revolver at all. Most men considered it a temporary solution, something to get by with until they could afford proper equipment. Few original belt slides survived because they were disposable gear, discarded when they wore out. But examples recovered from ranch sites in Texas and Wyoming show the same rough-cut edges and hand-punched holes. Honest tools for honest work. The holster of men who built their own solutions between cattle drives and never expected anyone to remember their names. Number 6. The high ride strong side. The real everyday carry. Here's the truth that Hollywood never shows you. Real cowboys wore their revolvers high and tight, not low and loose. The high ride strong side holster positioned the gun on the dominant hip, with the grip sitting just below the ribs. The weapon rode close to the body, secured by a leather thong looped over the hammer or a simple retention strap snapped across the grip. This wasn't a dramatic gunfighter's rig. It was the everyday carry of the working frontier, the method used by more cowboys, lawmen, and settlers than any other holster design in the Old West. The reasons were entirely practical. A high-ride holster kept the revolver stable during the brutal physical demands of frontier life. Riding, roping, branding, climbing fences, loading wagons. The gun didn't slap against the thigh with every step or catch on saddle leather during a quick mount. A man could wear it from sunup to sundown without the constant irritation of a bouncing, shifting weapon dragging at his belt. Security mattered far more than speed. Most high-ride holsters covered the trigger guard completely, providing crucial protection against accidental discharge. The retention thong ensured the weapon wouldn't bounce free during hard riding, a thrown rope, or a fall from horseback. For working men who might fire their revolvers once or twice a year, losing the gun entirely was a far greater concern than shaving a half second off the draw. Lawmen like Bat Masterson and Dallas Staudenmeier wore high-ride holsters throughout their storied careers. These were men who'd survived real gunfights and understood what actually mattered when lead started flying. The gun needed to be there, secure and ready, when you reached for it. Everything else was secondary to that fundamental truth. The high-ride strong side wasn't dramatic. It didn't look dangerous or intimidating on the street. It just worked. Day after day, year after year, through choking dust, driving rain, and brutal summer sun. This was the holster of men who valued absolute reliability over flashy reputation. Next time you see those old photographs of actual frontier figures, look carefully at where the gun sits. High on the belt, tight against the body, grip tucked just below the ribs. Exactly where it needed to be for a man who spent his life working cattle and riding hard country. Not posing for newspaper photographers or strutting down Main Street looking for trouble. Number 5, the cross draw. Practical carry for horsemen. Of all the ways to carry a revolver in the Old West, the cross draw might have been the smartest for men who spent their lives in the saddle. Instead of positioning the gun on the dominant hip, the cross draw placed it on the opposite side, with the grip angled forward. The shooter reached across his body to draw, a motion that worked perfectly while seated on a horse. No need to twist or lift the elbow awkwardly. Just reach, grip, and pull. The cross draw solved a real problem. A strong side holster dug into the thigh during long hours of riding. It got trapped between body and saddle leather. Drawing while mounted meant raising the elbow high and contorting the shoulder. The cross draw eliminated all of that. Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and countless unnamed trail hands favored this position when traveling long distances. The revolver rested out of the way against the left hip, grip ready for the right hand to reach across and grab. A rider could draw his gun without letting go of the reins or shifting his weight. The tactical disadvantage was speed on foot. A cross draw was slower than a strong side draw in a stand-up fight. The arm had to travel farther, and the motion was easier for an opponent to read. But cowboys and lawmen understood the trade-off. They spent far more time riding than dueling. Cross-draw holsters usually rode high, secured with a simple strap or thong. They were plain leather, built for function. No silver conchos or fancy tooling. Just solid equipment for men who valued practical solutions over dramatic appearances. In Hollywood, the cross-draw rarely made the screen because it looked awkward on camera. But in the real West, it was the mark of a practical man. Someone who understood that the best carry method was the one that worked for how you actually lived. Number 4, the reverse draw, the gunfighter's twist. Some men wanted every possible advantage in a gunfight, even if it meant carrying their weapon in a way that looked backward to everyone else. The reverse draw positioned the revolver on the strong side hip, but with the grip facing rearward instead of forward. The shooter drew by, reaching back, grabbing the grip with a thumb forward hold, and sweeping the weapon up in a twisting motion. It sounds awkward. In the right hands, it was lightning fast. John Wesley Hardin, considered one of the deadliest gunfighters of the frontier, carried his revolvers in reverse draw holsters throughout his career. His rigs placed the butts facing backward, allowing him to draw from almost any position, standing, sitting, even lying down. Contemporaries described his speed as almost supernatural. The reverse draw offered several tactical advantages. The sweeping motion kept the muzzle pointed downrange throughout the draw, reducing the chance of shooting yourself in the leg. It allowed for a draw from unusual positions that would have been impossible with a forward-facing grip. And it confused opponents who expected a traditional motion, but the technique demanded serious practice. The grip angle was unnatural, and the twisting motion required coordination that most men never developed. Without hundreds of hours of repetition, a reverse draw was slower and clumsier than a standard carry. It was a specialist method, not an everyday solution. Very few holsters were built specifically for reverse draw. Most users simply rotated a standard rig on their belt. Original examples connected to Hardin are disputed, though his preference for the carry method is well documented in contemporary accounts. The reverse draw never became common because it required too much skill, but for the handful of men who mastered it, the technique offered an edge that could mean the difference between walking away and being carried out. Number 3, the saddlebag stash, keeping powder dry. Here's something the movies never tell you. Many cowboys didn't wear their guns at all during daily work. They kept them stashed in saddlebags, wrapped in oilcloth, ready for trouble but out of the way. Working cattle was hard, physical labor, roping, branding, riding through brush and across streams. A belt gun got in the way, bounced around, and took abuse that could damage the mechanism. Worse, black powder ammunition didn't handle moisture well. Sweat, rain, and river crossings could render a revolver useless when you needed it most. The saddlebag stash solved these problems. The gun stayed protected, in a waterproof wrap, accessible if needed but safe from the constant wear and tear of range work. A cowboy could ride all day without the weight on his hip, and still have his revolver within arm's reach on the saddle. This carry method made particular sense for long cattle drives. Cowboys on the Chisholm Trail spent months in the saddle, sleeping rough and fording rivers. Keeping a revolver on the body through all of that was a recipe for rust and misfires. Better to store it properly and grab it when trouble appeared. Of course, the saddlebag stash meant no quick access. If a gunfight started suddenly, the weapon might as well have been back at the ranch. Cowboys using this method were betting that they'd have time to retrieve and unwrap their revolvers before things got critical. On the open range, that bet usually paid off. In town, it could get you killed. The saddlebag stash reflected the reality that most cowboys weren't gunfighters. They were laborers who owned a gun for emergencies and predators, not for dueling. Keeping the weapon safe and functional mattered more than keeping it ready for a showdown that would probably never come. Number 2, the concealed vest holster, the gambler's secret. In a crowded saloon, a visible revolver could cause more problems than it solved. Gamblers, businessmen, and men who preferred discretion over intimidation needed a way to carry that kept their weapon hidden, but ready. The concealed vest holster answered that need. Tailors in New Orleans, San Francisco, and St. Louis began sewing small leather sleeves into the linings of waistcoats during the 1860s. These hidden holsters held compact revolvers or derringers just behind the breast pocket, completely invisible from the outside. A man could sit at a card table for hours, and no one would suspect he was armed until he reached inside his vest and produced steel. The technique required quality tailoring. Cheap vests showed the outline of the weapon, or sagged under the weight. Fine establishments used silk linings and careful stitching to keep the holster invisible. Wealthy gamblers paid premium prices for vests that concealed Remington double-barrel derringers without a hint of a bulge. The advantage was pure surprise. In an era when men watched each other's hands and belt lines for signs of trouble, a vest holster put the weapon where nobody expected it. A gambler could lay his hands flat on the table, looking completely unarmed, and still have 2 barrels of .41 caliber persuasion inches from his fingers. The drawbacks were practical. Drawing from inside a vest was slower than drawing from a belt. The weapon had to be small enough to stay hidden, which meant limited firepower. And in warm weather, wearing a vest just to carry a gun was obvious to anyone paying attention. Still, for men who made their living in saloons and gambling halls, the concealed vest holster offered exactly what they needed: a hidden edge in a world where showing your cards too early could get you killed. Number 1, the Ranger belt and holster combo, the real gunslinger setup. Long before Hollywood invented the drop-loop quick-draw rig, the men who actually lived by the gun trusted one carry system above all others: the Ranger belt and holster combo. Developed by Texas Rangers during the 1870s, this wasn't just a holster. It was a complete fighting system engineered by men who understood that your equipment had to work perfectly when your life was on the line. A Ranger belt was built from 2 layers of thick skirting leather, stitched together with rawhide or brass rivets to prevent the stretching that plagued cheaper civilian belts. Between those layers ran hand-cut cartridge loops, each sized precisely to hold .44 or .45 caliber rounds snugly against the body. No rattling, no fumbling. Every round exactly where a man's fingers expected it to be. The holster itself was a high-ride design, closely fitted to the specific revolver: Colt Single Action Army, Smith & Wesson Schofield, Remington Army. The leather was molded wet around the weapon, dried stiff, and treated with tallow for water resistance. The gun seated deep with only the grip exposed, secured but ready for a clean draw. Texas Ranger captains like Leander McNelly and John B. Jones were photographed wearing these rigs during the brutal border conflicts of the 1870s. Their belts show hard use, the leather sweat darkened and the edges worn smooth. These weren't parade ground showpieces. They were working equipment tested in actual gunfights. The design proved so effective that commercial makers like Collins and Morrison began offering Ranger-style rigs by the 1880s. Military officers bought civilian versions for frontier service. Anyone who understood the difference between practical combat gear and fancy leatherwork recognized the Ranger belt as the professional's choice. What set this system apart was integration. Belt and holster worked together as a single unit. The weight distributed properly. The cartridge loops positioned naturally. Every element designed to support the one thing that mattered: getting the gun out, loaded, and on target faster than the other man. The Ranger belt and holster combo wasn't flashy. It didn't have silver conchos or carved floral patterns. It had something better: the proven performance of men who'd staked their lives on it and walked away. If the Hollywood Buscadero was a costume, this was the reality. The rig that truly earned the name Gunslinger. 13 carry methods, from the simple waistband tuck to the professional Ranger rig, and every one of them tells the same story. The real Wild West wasn't about looking dangerous. It was about staying alive. These weren't fashion choices. They were survival decisions. Each method solved a specific problem: keeping a weapon concealed, accessible while mounted, protected from the elements, or ready for the fight that might come any second. Every scratch in that leather, every wear pattern in that cloth, represents a man who trusted his equipment with his life. Hollywood gave us the drop-loop holster and the quick-draw showdown. History gave us working cowboys with revolvers shoved in their waistbands, gamblers with derringers sewn into their vests, and Texas Rangers with purpose-built fighting rigs that looked plain but performed when nothing else mattered. The truth is that most frontiermen hoped they'd never have to draw their guns at all. They carried them like they carried everything else. Practically, efficiently, with as little fuss as possible. The weapon wasn't a symbol, it was a tool. And the carry method was just another piece of equipment chosen for what worked, not what looked impressive. That's the real Old West, not the one on the movie screen, the one built on leather, iron, and hard-won experience. If you made it this far, you've seen through the myths to the genuine history underneath. Subscribe for more journeys into the weapons and methods that actually shaped the frontier. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.